In this video, I present to you an hour and a half of my knowledge about the economics of starships in the Star Wars galaxy. I've done a lot of sketchy things in my life, and so I've gained a lot of knowledge. We'll be talking about the cost of all of your favorite starfighters, capital ships from various factions, Rebel Alliance, Galactic Empire. We'll also be talking about some of the most affordable ships you can buy and some of the most expensive. We even have a segment where we talk about the best resale value, for those of you who like to be smart shoppers. I respect that. There's also some information about the real-life cost of starships and starfighters. Well, anyway, guys, grab a drink, grab a snack, and enjoy. Starting a series that looks at the prices of various starfighters of various military factions in Star Wars, starting off with the Rebel Alliance Starfighter Corps. This is a unique military force almost completely privately funded by activists and wealthy patrons. They face a difficult situation and are growing up against one of the most powerful military forces in the history of the galaxy, the Imperial Navy. The rebellion has no real chance to win against the Empire in a straight-up slugfest, and so it relies on a state-of-the-art Starfighter Corps, which is both mobile and able to operate independently from a larger fleet. When the Empire began nationalizing major industries like the shipbuilding industry, some mid-sized companies like Incom Corporation actually protested. Incom Corporation was known for developing sleek and formidable snub fighters like the Z-95 Headhunter and the larger ARC-170 starfighter. A good number of Incom's design and engineering staff would actually defect to the Rebel Alliance once they realized their company would be producing ships for the Galactic Empire. The T-65B X-Wing, as it was called, was really just a prototype, originally designed to be a multi-purpose mainline starfighter. However, it did not fit into the Empire's mass-produced cheap starfighter doctrine. The T-65B was anything but cheap. It had state-of-the-art shields, power plant, armor, Class 1 hyperdrive, and enough firepower to carry out attacks on capital ships. It was a well-balanced, one-size-fit-all solution for the Rebel Alliance's ragtag guerrilla force. And because Incom volunteered all of their research and blueprints for free, the rebellion more or less produced these ships at cost in small home manufacturing operations. Although the X-Wing did not enjoy the price cut of being mass-produced, these starships were still remarkably cheap at around only $150,000 in credit. By the way, as stated in previous videos, we've calculated the cost of the galactic credit to be nearly 1-to-1 with the US dollar. Ultimately, the X-Wing ends up costing nearly 3 times more than the TIE Fighter, but the Rebel Alliance is a lot shorter on pilots than it is on credits. But before we continue today's video, a word from our sponsor, Extra. This is one of the first debit cards out there that actually allows you to build your credits and collect reward points like you would with a credit card. It's perfect for individuals who don't want or cannot get access to a credit card yet, but want to have their spending reported to the credit bureaus for future loan applications or mortgages. Extra can be linked up to your existing bank account and requires no credit check. It works by spotting you funds every time you make a purchase and then auto-paying themselves back the next business day from your connected bank balance. It's perfect for new immigrants without credit in America and also individuals trying to rebuild their credit. Applying is easy. Just check out the link below in our description and replace your debit card with one that actually rewards you for using it. Designed by Incom Corporation, the UT-60D U-Wing was a transport gunship utilized by the Rebel Alliance. Despite their larger wingspan and impressive S-foil, the U-Wing was actually quite small compared to other ships in its class. It can only carry about a single Rebel rifle squad on board, but it was sleek, fast, and maneuverable for its class. It could also be used for infantry fire support and at the same time do some light dogfighting. For a ship of its size and quality, though, the U-Wing was remarkably underpriced at around just 65,000 credits per unit. This might be because of the UT-60D's more civilian origin, which can be seen in the BT-45D U-Wing variant. Built by Quad Systems Engineering, the RZ-1A Wing is an interceptor with its roots stemming from the Clone Wars era. Specifically, the wedge-shaped interceptors utilized by the Jedi Order like the Delta-7 Ether Sprite or the ETA-2 Actus. These were light interceptors that were stripped down in armor and shielding and designed solely for speed and maneuverability. The A-Wing builds on the lessons learned by Quad Systems Engineering during the war and represents the pinnacle in speed and interception capability. The RZ-1A Wing was rejected by the Empire because of cost. Ironically, the Rebel Alliance would be one of the earlier adopters of this light interceptor, and it would ultimately cause such a huge headache for the Empire that they would need to develop their own interceptor as a result. This new TIE interceptor cost more than double the standard TIE fighter, but still was slower than the A-Wing. Now, the A-Wing focused purely on speed. I mean, half of this thing was just a pair of oversized Noble Dex J77 Event Horizon engines, which really had no business being stuck onto such a tiny space frame, but the A-Wing also had powerful lasers, and it could even carry proton torpedoes. Some A-Wing pilots would even modify their ships and remove the shields to increase the speed even more. Although these guys also say that the shields are really light on the A-Wing and don't really do that much in the first place. At 175,000 credits per unit, this A-Wing was more expensive than the X-Wing and had a lot more limitations. And only talented X-Wing pilots were even given a chance to fly the A-Wing because it was just that difficult to fly. The T-47 Airspeeder is another Income Corporation product, and it exists within the Income ecosystem when it comes to control systems. And so the T-47 handles just like the T-16 and even the T-65B X-Wing. It's actually really brilliant that Income is able to do this, and their large and loyal fan base seems to point towards the success of creating this type of shared ecosystem. If you look at the Battle of Hoth, a group of X-Wing pilots were able to quickly transition to snow speeders and pilot them successfully against a group of AT-ATs. The T-47 was mainly built for atmospheric flight, and they were pretty lightly equipped, but they only cost around 18,000 credits per unit. It took a while for the Rebels to start manufacturing the X-Wing, and while the T-65B played a huge role at turning the tide against the Empire at Scarif and Yavin 4, for all the years before that, all the Rebellion basically had were the RZ-1 A-Wings and another ship, the Y-Wing. The Y-Wing was a Clone Wars era ship, and the Rebellion liked it so much that they had their own modification designated the BTLA-4 Y-Wing variant. This was just a Y-Wing with its engine nacelles removed for easier access during maintenance. This also lightened the craft's weight and shortened the length of the craft so that the aging Konasair R200 ion jets on this thing don't have to work too hard, especially in atmosphere. The rear gunner turret was also removed to save weight, plus it's not like the Rebels had enough pilots to spare to put back there in the first place. But what really made the Y-Wing such a favorite for the Rebellion, as we mentioned in our affordable ship list, is just how cheap it was. Oftentimes, you could find a Y-Wing that was in decent shape for only around 60,000 credits, around the same price as a TIE fighter, and much less than half the price of an X-Wing. Sometimes Rebel spec op groups would just steal Y-Wings from Imperial junkyards as well, so those were free basically. All you really need is an astromech, and they can basically jury-rig a slave controller and pilot a whole wing of Y-Wings by themselves. And so the Y-Wing might not be fast enough to really dogfight, they require a lot of maintenance as well, but they're rugged and can carry a lot of bombs. That's basically all you really need for an assault fighter. As well as the Y-Wing performed, the Rebel Alliance wanted more. A capital ship-busting, blockade-smashing super assault starship. This is where the B-Wing comes into play. Designed by Slain and Corporal, you can tell by the vertical alignment of the ship by the way, the B-Wing had a ridiculous amount of weaponry stationed on board, but the ship was as unwieldy as it was powerful, and it couldn't do anything well aside from flying in a straight line. It was also a difficult ship to fly because its cockpit was designed around a gyroscopic control system that was prone to being high maintenance. At a price of 222,000 credits, this was one of the most expensive starfighters fielded by the Rebel Alliance. So there you have it, guys. Those are the listed prices for most of the starfighters employed by the Rebel Alliance. Of course, these guys stole ships. They also used Clone Wars era ships, which we'll probably cover the price of those when we're actually doing the Republic. But let me know in the comment section below what you guys want to see next. Rebel Alliance capital ships, or should we go on to Imperial starfighters first? The Empire is known for its tyranny, which is enforced by its massive military-industrial complex. I would argue that the Galactic Empire was also a mass manufacturing and efficiency expert. Because patrolling an entire galaxy, even if you're as large as the Galactic Empire, is an impossible feat. And so the Empire's starfighter doctrine was not based entirely on tactical or even strategic needs. Imperial brass focused more heavily on affordability and streamlining the production process. And so with the TIE Fighter line, you'll see some similarities with Incom. Most of the TIE Fighters shared very similar controls, they had shared parts and components, and it was easy for mechanics to get certification across the entire line of starfighters if they were at least familiar with one of the TIE line fighters. But as the Rebel Alliance continued to grow in power and the Galactic Civil War turned into a more open shooting war, the TIE Fighter line of starfighters was basically stretched to its limits. In the first few years of the Empire, we have to remember that the military went through a huge transition process from the Grand Army of the Republic to the Galactic Empire military. And so many of the first fighters bearing the Empire symbol were Clone Wars era starfighters, and many of the pilots were still clones. The Alpha 3 Nimbus class V-Wing was a Quad Systems Engineering entry into the war. It combines the Delta-shaped hull of the Delta 7 and ETA Actis utilized by the Jedi, and combines it with a pair of S-foils which are aligned to the hull in a very similar way to the future TIE Fighter. The V-Wing also featured twin ion engines, which is exactly what TIE in TIE Fighter stands for. The V-Wing was mainly created as a reaction to the Battle of Coruscant, where the much larger three-person crew ARC-170 suffered terrible losses against agile drone fighters. The Republic brass, which would turn into the Imperial High Command, would change their starfighter doctrine to favor of smaller and more maneuverable ships. The V-Wing fit the bill, but also signaled the end of many creature comforts that Imperial pilots once enjoyed. For instance, the V-Wing was not pressurized, and so the pilot had to wear an evac suit at all times. The ship also didn't have a hyperdrive. And at a steep price of 120,000 credits per unit, the V-Wing was almost twice the price of a V-19 Torrent starfighter, which it was replacing. And so the Alpha 3 Nimbus would be replaced as soon as the TIE Fighter line was ready. The TIE Fighter prototype would be the future of the Empire. It was developed by Rafe Senior, head of Senior Fleet Systems. Interestingly enough, Senior Fleet Systems was a very unknown and small manufacturer of starships during the Clone Wars era. But Rafe Senior had close ties to Moff Wilhuff Tarkin, and so he fell into favor with the Empire shortly after the war ended. Senior Fleet Systems began designing more experimental and exotic ships like Palpatine's own pleasure craft, the Imperialist, which was rumored to be a custom job designed by Senior himself. Senior Systems would also develop the Carry-On Spike Corvette, an extremely expensive and high-tech fully cloaked stealth ship for Wilhuff Tarkin. Eventually, Rafe Senior's TIE Fighter prototype would be selected as the mainline fighter for the Galactic Empire. The TIE LN, or the TIE Line, or TIE In Space Superiority Fighter, would be one of the most widely manufactured starfighters in galactic history. It could be found in every corner of the Empire, stationed on tiny remote outposts in the Outer Rim, or inside of massive super star destroyers guarding the core. But this wasn't a one-size-fit-all type of multi-purpose starfighter like the T-65 X-Wing. The TIE LN was painfully limited because of cost-saving issues with its design, and also the Imperial Navy's doctrine, which relied on large battleships for most of its operations. The TIE LN was mainly dedicated to light interception duties. This became increasingly important once ship designers realized that the Empire's Star Destroyer fleet, for the most part, lacked adequate point defense weapons. The TIE LN was a very capable dogfighter, but its limited range, lack of hyperdrive, heavy weapons, shields, and even life support were an extreme that the Empire imposed on its ironically very well-trained and talented pilot pool. And unfortunately, a lot of very talented Imperial pilots lost their lives because the TIE Fighter lacked some very standard safety features that you could find on other ships. It's not to say that the TIE Fighter was a garbage fighter. I mean, the Rebels really did respect this starfighter. It was dangerous. Plus, its airframe design, which almost lacked any moving parts, meant that only 5% of TIE Fighters were lost as a result of field attrition. I mean, those numbers would change in the last few years of the war when the Empire's logistical system falls apart, but this was really a superbly designed ship from a manufacturing, maintenance, and logistical standpoint. Even the Imperial pilots and their TIE Fighters were highly exchangeable. You weren't just assigned one specific TIE Fighter, you just got one that was fueled up and ready to go. And so the Empire's tyranny here looks a lot more like an efficient corporation like Amazon, which boils down its manpower into numbers and figures on an app. But to write off this spectacular cost-saving engineering marvel just because it's underperformed at a few battles is most unfortunate. The standard TIE Fighter only costs 60,000 credits, about 2 to 3 times less than an X-Wing or an A-Wing. And while I like X-Wings and A-Wings more than the TIE Fighter, I'm not going to take those ships over 3 TIE Fighters. It's just not a fair match. Another early TIE fighter was the TIE SA bomber. This was a slightly larger and better armored craft, which featured a second munitions pod, which was full of proton torpedoes, bombs, and other goodies. The TIE bomber was mainly designed to go up against heavy fortifications or larger capital ships, but since the Empire faced a small mobile rebel group pulling guerrilla tactics, the TIE bomber's role became less important. They however did take part in punitive campaigns against civilian centers, like when the Empire executed the Knight of 1,000 Tears on Mandalore. The TIE bomber costs around 150,000 credits, which is actually quite expensive and probably limits how much this bomber is going to be deployed. You'll only see it in special situations. The TIE IAD Interceptor was a direct reaction to the RZ-1 A-Wing, one of the fastest sublight speed starfighters of all time. The ship featured the bent wing shape of the prototype TIE Advance flown by Vader, combined with an upgraded power plant, making it almost as fast as an A-Wing. The Interceptor also featured 4 wingtip cannons, which were extremely deadly and could quickly overwhelm the shields of Rebel fighters. The TIE Interceptor did give the Empire an advantage against the Rebellion for a short period of time, but its lack of shields and hyperdrive meant that it suffered from many of the same problems that the standard TIE fighter did. Plus, the Interceptor cost 120,000 credits, twice as much as the standard TIE. The TIE RB Heavy Starfighter was an odd attempt to make the TIE fighter less TIE fighter-like. Nicknamed the TIE Brute, the TIE Heavy Starfighter was equipped with life support and a pressurized cockpit. It also had a reinforced transparent steel viewport. The cockpit was off-centered and a heavier HS 9.3 blaster cannon was added to the ship. Originally, Imperial designers had tried to place this larger blaster cannon on the standard TIE, but it just did not fit. And so that is why we have the TIE Brute now. Apparently, military brass wanted more powerful standard weapons so that the TIE fighter didn't need support ships on missions. The TIE Heavy ended up costing around 90,000 credits, but it was slow, clunky, it lacked shields, and heavily underperformed on the battlefield. The TIE Experimental Air Superiority Fighter is probably one of my favorite TIE fighters, simply because it looks like it can at least generate a little bit of lift with its S-foils. By the way, the reason why TIE fighters can even fly in atmosphere is because of a technology known as inertial dampeners. They're used to create artificial gravity bubbles around the ship so that pilots don't turn into a bloody mess from abrupt turns, and starships don't fall apart when they clearly aren't aerodynamic and trying to fly through atmosphere. The wind resistance, however, is always a problem, and the TIE fighter's large solar panels act like sails in the crosswind when it hits it. The TIE Experimental Air Superiority Fighter addressed that problem by redesigning the S-foils into a more suitable blade shape. It immediately became one of the best atmospheric fighters in the galaxy, with an impressive top speed of around 1,500 kilometers per hour. Which I know compared to our own technology is not that fast, but we have to remember that in the Star Wars galaxy they seem to have lost the art of aerodynamics a long time ago. Plus, 1,500 kilometers is still breaking the sound barrier, so that's kind of nice. This TIE Experimental costs around 50,000 credits new, making it actually cheaper than the standard TIE fighter, and it even had additional heavy lasers and a proton bomb chute for ground attack. The ship also featured a bombardier in addition to the pilot, which wasn't a big problem for the Empire. They didn't really have a manpower issue. That was more of the Rebel Alliance's problem. The TIE Reaper attack lander borrows from the design of our previous air superiority fighter. It has similar lift-creating wings that carries a large compartment that can hold an entire rifle squad. Unlike the Lambda-class shuttle, the TIE Reaper was an assault lander. It's designed to take heavy fire and insert elite spec op units into frontline situations or behind enemy lines. The TIE Reaper lacked the dogfighting skills of other ships in its class like the U-Wing, but it still managed to do its job, which was transporting soldiers under heavy fire to the battlefield very well. It cost around 140,000 credits new and 60,000 credits used. The Lambda-class T-4A was the most common shuttle used by the Empire. Interestingly enough, the multi-purpose transport was considered a relatively elegant and luxurious ship. It had a well-appointed interior that looked more suited for diplomats and politicians than it does for a squad of sweaty stormtroopers about to hit the AO. The Lambda-class also cost $140,000 like the TIE Reaper. Both of these ships had a Class 1 hyperdrive, they had great shields, armor, and an assortment of weapons on board. The Lambda-class, however, had folding wings, which took up less space on ships, and it was more commonly used by high-ranking officers and the regular military. Senior Fleet Systems would attempt to design more advanced starfighters to take on the robust snub fighters used by the Rebel Alliance. You had the TIE Advanced V1 flown by the Inquisitors with their curved S-foils. It was one of the first TIE fighters to have shields and a hyperdrive. A Class 4.5 hyperdrive, but still, it's a hyperdrive. At 150,000 credits, though, the TIE Advance underperformed compared to its similarly priced Rebel counterparts. You also had the TIE Advance X1. This was a smaller profile TIE fighter, which was also shielded and had a small hyperdrive. This was priced at 160,000 credits. Both of these TIE fighters were far too expensive for mass deployment, and at the same time, they didn't perform well enough to really change the course of the war. Then came the TIE Defender, a product of Grand Admiral Thrawn, who had been dealing with an exceptionally nasty rebel outbreak in the Lothal sector. Thrawn was a huge critic of the Emperor and Tarkin's Death Star plans. He believed that what the Empire needed was a multi-purpose elite starfighter, which when widely deployed can significantly decrease the operational capacity of Rebel cells. The TIE Defender and the elite version of the TIE Defender were among some of the best starfighters ever to be built. You can identify one of these ships by their tri-wing S-foil designs. The TIE Defender Elite came to fruition because of Darth Vader himself. He enjoyed flying the regular Defender so much that he actually gave Thrawn notes, which included extra weapons and some simpler control schemes. This starfighter would prove to be a headache for every Rebel snub fighter it encountered. Not even the X-Wing stood a chance against this thing. The TIE Defender featured heavy shields, armor, a Class 2 hyperdrive, and no less than 8 laser cannons mounted wingtip, along with missile launchers. But the original Defender cost a whopping 300,000 credits new, and the Elite version added an additional 10,000 credits to the price. The Starship unfortunately came way too late to the Empire in too few numbers. And when Grand Admiral Thrawn was assaulted by hyperspace traveling whales and whisked back to the unknown region, the TIE Defender program would also fall. He was its sole defender aside from Vader, and the project was competing for resources with the Death Star, which unfortunately became the main focus for the Empire. So there you have it, guys. That is our list of Imperial starfighters. As you can see, the Empire struggled with finding balance between quality and also that cheap price they're looking for in order to deploy that massive military presence.
Don't stay awake for too long, don't go to bed.
The CR-90 was the first starship to appear in Star Wars on screen. The all-Iranian diplomatic vessel Tantive at the time was being chased down by an Imperial-class Star Destroyer over Tatooine. The CR-90 Corvette was a Krillin engineering product, but unlike its freighter line, this ship was designed from the get-go to be special, without relying on any aftermarket upgrades. A quick glance at the rear of the CR-90 and you'll see no less than 11 ion turbine engines, which gives this ship a ridiculously high sublight speed. It makes it perfect for running blockades, as the CR-90 would often do during the Clone Wars on behalf of Republic diplomatic missions, and later on for the Rebel Alliance against the Empire. In the early years of the Alliance to restore the Republic, prominent senators like Bail Organa would essentially take their government-appointed diplomatic vessel and use them for illicit activities like recruiting more rebels to the cause or even smuggling weapons. The CR-90 was not only extremely fast, it also had several turbo lasers on board so it could even deal with other capital ships. It also had docking points that were external for starfighters. And so in those earlier years of the rebellion, the CR-90 was basically used as a ship of the line or even a command ship. CR-90's new costs around 3.5 to 2.7 million credits, but a used one could go for as low as 1.5 million credits. Next up, we have one of the most hated starships in the Rebel Alliance. This is the GR-75 Medium Transport, which essentially was a shell-shaped container with engines on the back of it. The GR-75 was commonly used for shipping products within systems or shorter range travel. It was also used to ferry supplies from ships in orbit to the ground. Its main claim to fame was its role in the successful evacuation of Echo Base on Hoth. These things are basically just fat tunas waiting to get picked off by pirates and TIE fighters, and so you're almost going to have to assign an escort to these things or else risk losing everything inside. At 90 meters in length and with minimal armor and shielding along with a ridiculously slow Class 4 hyperdrive, the GR-75 was very overpriced at 180,000 credits. You're almost better off getting the smaller but more heavily armored and armed Gazanti-class cruiser for around 200,000. Or better yet, just get the next ship on our list. The Sphyrna-class Hammerhead Corvette claimed its fame during the Battle of Scarif, when the badly damaged Lightmaker slammed into the disabled ISD Persecutor and pushed it into another Star Destroyer known as the Intimidator. These two ships would disintegrate once they struck each other, and their combined mass would fall into the planet's gravity well, which would take out the shield gate over Scarif as well. It's probably one of the most lopsided and efficient kills by a tiny ship ever done. But then again, we are in Star Wars, and I vaguely remember an X-Wing and N1 starfighter pulling off similarly spectacular and unbalanced feats. The Stringknife-class Hammerhead was a Corellian Engineering Corporation ship of the Corvette class, but its design was inspired by the Hammerhead cruisers utilized by the Old Republic more than 1,000 years ago. Like these older ships, the Stringknife featured a heavily armored cockpit and several forward-facing weapons. This means that the Hammerhead Corvette is designed for very aggressive, forward-facing offensive attacks. During the Battle of Scarif, this 1 million credit ship was able to take out 2 Star Destroyers, easily worth hundreds of millions of credits, along with that priceless shield gate. I would definitely recommend getting this over the GR75. In the early days before the Mon Calamari joined the Rebellion, the largest ship in the Rebel Alliance fledgling navy was the EF-76 Nebulon B escort frigate. This ship was designed by Quat Drive Yards for the Imperial Navy as a cost-saving alternative to the Imperial-class Star Destroyer. It's a lot smaller and designed for those more remote parts of the galaxy where you don't need as large of a ship. The Nebulon B was heavily armed with point defense weapons and had a few turbolasers to deal with enemy capital ships as well. It was quite a formidable ship, but against the Star Destroyers that it was supposed to replace in less important theaters, it didn't really stand much of a chance. The Nebulon B frigate was around 300 meters long, and for the most part it was used as a command ship and a hospital ship by the Rebellion. The Nebulon B escort frigate cost a whopping 8.5 million credits, but thankfully most of the Rebel Alliance's Nebulon Bs were stolen from the Empire. The Pelta-class frigate from Quat Drive Yards is another Clone Wars holdover. Utilized by both sides of the war, the Pelta-class was mostly used as a transport ship for delivering supplies and relief, or for medical purposes. The Rebel Alliance would adopt the Pelta-class in the early days of the war. Phoenix Cell, a famous Rebel unit that was active in the Lothal sector before the Battle of Yavin, used a Pelta-class command cruiser variant as their home base. The Rebels would add additional wings which had engines in them to this variant, making it much faster. There were also extra docking points and extra turbo lasers fitted onto the ship as well to help the ship serve Phoenix Cell's needs. The main weakness that the Pelta-class suffered was that its armor and shields were relatively weak, making the ship very easy to destroy. And at around 7.2 million credits, it makes this ship pretty expensive for what you're getting. Before Admiral Akbar and Home 1, we had another famous Mon Calamari admiral known as Raddus, who captained the MC-75 star cruiser known as the Profundity. This would be the proud command ship of the Rebel relief fleet sent to Scarif to extract one small piece of information that exposed the weakness of the Death Star. At 1.2 kilometers in length, the MC-75 star cruiser was shorter than your average MC-80 Mon Cala cruiser. But it was still a very heavily equipped ship. It had a lot of point defense weapons along with several batteries of turbolasers. It also had that redundant style of shielding that most larger Mon Calamari ships used. They basically used a bunch of redundant shield generators and scattered it all over the ship. This was how Mon Cala cruisers could go up against massive Star Destroyers and still survive. During the Battle of Scarif, the Profundity had to occupy the attention of 2 Imperial-class Star Destroyers and still somehow managed to outlast them. At 88 million credits, the MC-75 represents a very serious leap for the Rebel Alliance. They're going from these smaller civilian freighters that are outfitted for guerrilla warfare to actually fielding what essentially is a warship. It took a while for the rest of Mon Calamari society to defect to the rebellion. The first exodus from Mon Cala was taken by Admiral Raddus and several members of the Mon Cala military right after the Empire took over. It was more than a decade later that the Mon Cala merchant fleet, the rest of the planet's naval power, finally defected as well. They would bring with them almost a dozen different MC-80 class star cruisers. Now, it should be mentioned that Mon Cala never made the same ship twice, and so every MC-80 star cruiser has its own unique size and design. But generally, these ships were around the same length as an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, around 1 mile or 1.6 kilometers. And while they couldn't outgun an ISD, they could outlast one because of that redundant shield system I mentioned before. Basically, the ship had much weaker shields, but a much faster recharge rate because of all of that redundancy. At 104 million credits, the MC-80 isn't quite as expensive as an ISD, but it definitely gets the job done. The VCX-100 light freighter is another Korean Engineering Corporation's freighter. Instead of being a YT series though, like the Millennium Falcon, it's a VCX series, which was smaller and had less storage but more sleek and capable in a dogfight. The most famous VCX-100 in the Rebel Alliance fleet would have been the Ghost, piloted by Harrison Dula and crewed by the Spectre Rebel cell. The VCX had a standard layout with several interior rooms for crew inside. The ship had some light lasers and turrets for anti-ship operations and a small VCX series starfighter shuttle, which was very functional and even had a hyperdrive for its own away missions. At 155,000 credits new, the VCX-100 was kind of a premium civilian ship. We talked about the YT-1300 in our previous video about affordable ships. We found it to be very competitively priced at around 25,000 credits in the used market. So instead, we'll be taking a look today at the YT-2400, another common Karelian freighter that could be converted into a light gunship or transport. Unlike the VCX series, which was designed for speed and maneuverability, the YTs were designed to tow freight and larger ships. This is why many of the YT series ships that we see have offset cockpits, so that the pilot and crew can see what they're pushing around. The Rebel Cell Iron Squadron was known for using a YT-2400 freighter against the Empire. They're also known for using the YT-24's towing capacity to bring giant containers of explosives into the battle to be used as dumb bombs. At 15,000 new or 32,000 used, the YT-2400, like most ships of its class, was a blank canvas for a Starship engineer and pilot to play around with. So there you have it, guys. That is our list of Rebel ships and how much they cost. As you can see, they like using a lot of secondhand ships and even stealing ships when they could. So cost probably wasn't as much of a factor as getting people to kind of crew these gigantic starships.
Don't stay awake for too long, don't go to bed.
Ever since Supreme Chancellor Palpatine federalized the banking system during the last year of the Clone Wars, the Galactic Republic and Empire after it has been continuously printing credits in order to sustain a massive military-industrial complex. And this, of course, is all done at the expense of the average citizen. If you don't have one of those lucrative defense contractor jobs, or were lucky, smart, or rich enough to get placement in one of the vaunted Imperial Academies in the Inner Rim, you're probably going to have problems earning a decent wage. More importantly, all that rampant spending has caused hyperinflation, which makes your saved credits pretty much worthless at this point. So what do you do in this situation when you can hardly afford last week's bread prices, let alone next week's bread prices? Well, in human history, when hardship and turmoil erupt, those who were brave and courageous enough to uproot their lives and move to an area full of prosperity usually were the ones who survived and succeeded in life. Now, a good percentage of you at home watching are actually Americans. And maybe you, Steve, or your parents, or one of your ancestors at one time also made that difficult choice to leave whatever home was and search for riches and opportunities and probably dog-themed cryptocurrency here in the land of many opportunities. But in the Star Wars galaxy, moving from one region to another is a bit more complicated than here on Earth. Sometimes entire worlds lacked opportunity, or were about to be destroyed by a bunch of edgy fascists and their emo commander. This is, by the way, why you never tease emo kids. Be nice to them. They're just humans like the rest of us. Sure, they're struggling a little bit right now, but in the future, you better hope they believe in humanity when they're in charge of all the tech companies and algorithms, or else we're all going to be screwed. What are we talking about? Oh yeah, so in Star Wars, escaping your poverty, oppression, gravity, or boredom requires, at a minimum, a starship with maybe a hyperdrive. The problem is, in Star Wars, starships are not like cars and not immediately affordable to the average citizen. They're closer in price to houses in an artificially inflated market where first-time homebuyers have to compete with their grandparents' generation buying their fifth investment property. And so, as usual on this channel, we have created a hypothetical situation or problem that I think is relatively relatable for most people. And again, we will supply the solution by showing you guys 7 different starships that are incredibly affordable and can bring you from where you are right now to where you want to be. Conair Manufacturing was approached by the Galactic Republic during the Clone Wars to produce a starfighter bomber. The result was a well-balanced ship with plenty of armor, a large payload, and enough maneuverability and speed so that it didn't require an escort when going on attack runs. While the BTL Y-Wing had some mechanical issues, including problems with its finicky engines, the Rebel Alliance and even the Resistance more than half a century later would still fly variants of the BTL series Y-Wing. And one of the major reasons for this was that this ship was built in massive numbers and readily available to be taken from one of the many Imperial weapons stockpiles dotted across the galaxy. Now, 5 years ago, we did a video where we tried to figure out how much one credit was worth here on Earth and found that it was almost 1-to-1 with the US dollar at the time. And so with that in mind, a brand new A-Wing is estimated to cost around 135,000 credits and around 65,000 credits used. But honestly, depending on what era you're in, you can probably find one for even cheaper. I'm talking about a few thousand. I mean, sure, you'll probably have to fix up some things and replace some parts. Heck, you can even pull a rebel move and steal one yourself from a junkyard. This ship is hyperdrive equipped and it even has a rear turret in case you want to bring someone along. The bomb bays can be emptied as well and be used for storage. And keep in mind, the BTL Y-Wing is officially a military craft. That means a much stronger space frame, better armor, a more powerful power plant. It's just overall going to be much better and a little bit more expensive than civilian variants of this ship. For a lot of you out there, the Y-Wing is just not going to be enough space for you and your family, your extended family, slaves, I don't know. Which is why you should consider a light freighter. These are essentially giant containers with engines and hyperdrives and some other quality of life attachments like oxygen tanks bolted on. It's the Star Wars equivalent of a sketchy white van featured in your local Amber Alerts. And there's no sketchy van in Star Wars more beloved than a YT-1300 light freighter, made famous by Lando Calrissian and later Han Solo's Millennium Falcon. The YT-1300 was designed by Carillion Engineering Corporation. They were famous for making these types of small and mid-sized industrial ships. All of their vessels were very easy to modify and had a huge third-party aftermarket. A base YT-1300 costs only around 100,000 credits, but used you can find one as cheap as 25,000 credits, which is honestly a bargain considering how many people or goods you can bring along. The Y-Wing can obviously get you to places, but the YT-1300 with its many secret storage compartments can be your castle, your home, and also your workplace. I mean, hell, Han Solo charged Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke 10,000 credits just to go from the Outer Rim, Tatooine, to the Inner Rim, Alderaan. You can pay off the ship's price in just a few runs. Next up, we have another Carillion freighter. I mean, heck, this whole entire list can just be different types of Carillion freighters. At around 41.8 meters in length, the Gazanti-class cruiser is large enough for an entire small community to live on. It could support a few dozen people, and it could carry quite a lot of freight. Some variants of the Gazanti even could dock smaller starfighters or carry walkers in its undercarriage. The Rebel Alliance, the Republic, the Empire, the Separatists, even major criminal syndicates all deployed their own variants of the Gazanti, which like many Carillion vessels can be modified to do almost anything. With a price of 150,000 credits new and only 50,000 credits used, even the most impoverished scrappers on Jakku could scrape together enough credits with their friends and family to buy their way off-world. Okay, so let's say you're an excellent bush pilot, and for a living, you fly an Incom T-16 Skyhopper. Maybe you want more excitement or are prepared to do more freelance jobs, but you don't want to fly around a large bulk freighter because where's the fun in that? Instead, you want something fast and maneuverable, something that can be modified into a racer or even a fighter, if you want to take on some escort contracts, for instance. Well, if you are financially challenged but familiar with the Incom ecosystem of starfighters and speeders, might I recommend you guys the Z-95 Headhunter. This is kind of the Incom ship that started it all. Without this, there would be no X-Wing, no ARC-170 starfighter. Sure, the Z-95 is a bit outdated now when it comes to its shields and lack of hyperdrive, but to this day, it's still considered one of the most fun and pure starfighters to pilot around. Plus, the sheer amount of aftermarket parts the Z-95 has is ridiculous. I'm sure 100 years from now, you'll still be able to upgrade this ship to be competitive. Plus, it's very easy to install a hyperdrive into the ship so that it can extend your range to further systems. A Z-95 new costs around 80,000 credits, but you can find one as cheap as 40,000 credits used. The standard TIE Fighter is probably one of the most common starships in the galaxy, simply because the Imperial Navy is so massive and all-encompassing. Now, usually getting your hands on a TIE Fighter requires many years of schooling and training. But did you know that Senior Fleet Systems did sell a small amount of these crafts to private security companies as well? And some of those ships eventually would end up on the secondhand market. Now, Imperial records show us that a brand new TIE Line starfighter cost the Empire around 60,000 credits, but a used one is sold for as little as 25,000 credits. These starfighters are extremely fun to fly. They're kind of like the Mini Coopers of the Star Wars galaxy. But they do lack many systems that come standard on most ships of its class, and I'm not just talking about the hyperdrive. It's also lacking shields, heavy weapons, and even life support. Which again, is why this ship is so cheap. Next up, we have the VC-X series auxiliary fighter. This is a tiny bite-sized shuttle, which you might remember from the Rebels series. They would be attached onto the Ghost and be used for away missions. Despite its small size of around only 11.63 meters, unlike fighters, the VC-X series has a large passenger compartment that can fit up to 9 individuals, including the pilots. The VC-X series was lightly armed and shielded, and some variants even had a hyperdrive. For only 22,000 credits, this was a bargain and a steal. We started our list with a Clone Wars era Starship, so we might as well end it with another Clone Wars era Starship, because there are a lot of these things just lying around in junkyards. The low-altitude assault transport and its other gunship variants were the favorite sight of the average clone infantryman during the Clone Wars. These were rugged, reliable ships that usually transported reinforcements or got clones out of dodge. Some variants could even carry entire ATTE walkers onto the battlefield. After the war, these LAATs were still used by the Empire, and many of course were also stolen and used by the Rebel Alliance. Some also made it to the black market and second-hand market. The LAAT transport version has a MSRP of around 85,000 credits, but you can usually find a used one for half that price. The LAAT transport version, which doesn't have a passenger compartment, has an MSRP of only around 58,000. You can usually find them used for about the same price as a transport version. Although these ships don't have hyperdrives equipped, you can make an aftermarket upgrade pretty easily. Guys, I know ever since the Blue Shadow virus was released from that lab on Naboo, things have not been going well in the galaxy for most people. I know a lot of you guys feel like you're just stuck in a loop, you're just grinding for God knows what reason, and you feel like you have no hope. But honestly, hope is as easy as just purchasing one of these used starships I mentioned in our video before. Get into one of these old rust buckets and explore the galaxy. New economic opportunities, new adventures, and plenty of new experiences to learn from.
Stay awake for too long, don't go to bed.
Recently, we did a video that looked at some of the most affordable starships in the Star Wars galaxy. This is a video targeting individuals who were looking to escape from their terrible situation/planet and were trying to seek glory, fortune, and spice in the far corners of the universe. I believe that ultimately individuals who are able to uproot their lives and move towards greener pastures are the key to the survival and growth of any people. And so in that video, we mainly looked at hyperdrive-equipped starfighters and freighters that one could buy used for a pretty reasonable price. Today, we're going to fast forward a little bit and look at that same hypothetical shipbuilder, but more into the future. Our downtrodden moisture farmer has escaped his destitute home planet in the Outer Rim by putting together an old scavenged Y-Wing, and now he heads towards the riches of the core. He finds himself in the midst of the spoiled and elite of Coruscant. Well, actually, he just stays on the surface for a second. That's because he probably can't afford anything above level 1313. But unlike those who were born on the higher levels of Coruscant, this individual was born into a life of struggle. I mean, moisture farmers have to squeeze moisture out of the air to survive. Surely clocking in a few 80-hour work weeks in a factory isn't going to kill him. And so a decade later, through sheer determination and discipline, our humble moisture farmer is now the owner of the very factory he started working at when he first arrived. It really does bring tears to my eyes when I see someone achieve their own Coruscant dream. Sure, most people in the galaxy don't get their own Coruscant dream, but that's not our problem, or his problem. I guess the only thing he has to worry about now is how to spend his credits. I mean, sure, he's kept that old Y-Wing to remind himself of where he came from, but he also wants an upgrade. And so today, we'll be highlighting some of the fanciest and most expensive starfighters you can purchase for your credits. In order to make this most prestigious list, manufacturers have to produce a starfighter that's worth, at a minimum, of 200,000 credits. If you've seen our previous video on the cost of Rebel and Imperial starships, you'll know that a standard TIE fighter costs only 50,000, or a quarter of that. It's like comparing a fascist Hyundai Elantra with a entry-level supercar. And that's exactly what our first starfighter is, the N1 from Naboo, which honestly reminds me of an Italian supercar so much. When Pelimoto pulled back the sheets revealing what looked like a pretty gutted N1 Starfighter, I, like many of you, started geeking out. Although my level of nerdiness went immediately beyond the nostalgia of seeing a prequel ship post-Empire. What I saw was a classic beauty of a starfighter, one that I knew was extremely valuable and held its value throughout the decades, especially if it's restored properly. Now, obviously, the hack job that Pelimoto and Dinjarin did to this N1 is more Mad Max than classic auto show worthy, but at its core, Mando's Starship still had the same space frame and excellent J-type engines on it, which were essentially just downscaled versions of the engines used on Royal Naboo yachts. At 200,000 credits per unit, the N1 Starfighter barely makes our list, although given the fact that most of these starfighters were assembled by the Theed Palace Space Vessel Engineering Corps and only a handful were built, I would argue that this ship is also a collector piece, and a fully restored N1 Starfighter 50 years down the road could cost twice as much as its original price. The T-65B X-Wing is most people's favorite starfighter in Star Wars, and it's pretty easy to see why that is. But it was actually 3 times the price of a TIE fighter, making it a very expensive and well-equipped starship for a mainline fighter. And that's because the Rebels valued quality over quantity. Aside from some minor aesthetic changes, the T-85 X-Wing represents the newest version of the X-Wing family of starships. It boasted more powerful engines, shields, and flight systems, allowing the aging X-Wing design to still be relevant during the First Order versus Resistance War. Some might argue that the T-70 X-Wing and even the original T-65B was still relevant during this conflict, and since the Resistance was a paramilitary force, many of its pilots actually flew these older models. Resistance ace Poe Dameron, for instance, flew a T-70 X-Wing, which cost around 200,000 credits. The T-85 X-Wing cost 220,000 credits. Before we continue though, a word from our sponsor for today's video, Onasaber.com. Once again, we had the Cypher Blade. Now, this is one of Onasaber.com's dueling blades. This means it's a little simpler in design, lighter, and better balanced. And it looks amazing. It kind of gives off a Sith vibe with its sleek black handle and claw-like guards, which surrounds the emitter assembly. What makes this thing even cooler is that it's durable enough to really whack, because this is designed for sparring and practicing. The Cypher has many of the same features that their premium Xenopixel line has, like customized color, sound effects, and different types of blade modes. From now until February 28th, the Cypher Blade will be available for purchase for 30% off. And with our discount code MEOW, that's all caps, you'll get an additional 10% off. For more information, check out our link below. The extremely awkward ASF-01B wing from Slane and Corporal fit a very interesting niche within the Rebel Alliance Navy. This was a fighter designed to use its massive firepower to take out capital ships. It had on board multiple SW-7A ion cannons, a R-9X heavy laser cannon, and 2 MG-9 torpedo launchers. Additional bolt-on weapons and placements could be attached to the multiple hardpoints on the ship's command pod. At 220,000 credits, the B-Wing was one of the most expensive Rebel starfighters deployed during the Galactic Civil War. But whenever one of these ships took out a multi-million credit Imperial light cruiser, for instance, then all of a sudden the cost of the B-Wing doesn't seem to matter that much. Okay, our next ship, the Geonosian Solar Sailor, is technically not a starfighter, but it does seem to be the same size as your typical starfighter, so we'll include it in this list. Most famously used by Count Dooku, leader of the Separatist Alliance, this luxury star yacht was minimalistic, sleek, and elegant in its design. You're going to find creature comforts on the Prunwarka 116 class interstellar sloop that you definitely won't find in an X-Wing cockpit. As a matter of fact, the ship even comes with its own droid pilot. But what makes this ship so special is in its name, the gigantic solar sail that allows the ship to fly at ridiculous sublight speeds. The ship essentially had a large parachute-like device that could catch and ride the solar winds, and while the Solar Sailor does not accelerate very quickly at first, you can reach sublight speeds that match and maybe even surpass that of an X-Wing. And while the ship doesn't have any weapons on board, it does have a triple-layered shield system, which is very robust for a civilian ship. At 240,000 credits, the Prunwarka 116 class interstellar sloop will set you back quite a lot of money. But on the bright side, the solar sails means that you'll never have to fill up your fuel tank again. Towards the end of the Galactic Empire's reign, the Imperial Navy began experimenting with much more capable TIE fighter designs. Grand Admiral Thrawn ends up building the TIE Defender after struggling to capture and destroy a rebel cell in the Lothal sector. The TIE Defender was an extremely potent starfighter and a game-changer for the Empire. Equipped with shields, a ridiculous amount of firepower, including 8 forward-facing lasers and a proton torpedo launcher, the TIE Defender made quick work of every rebel fighter it encountered, including the X-Wing. Had the Empire had more time, had Thrawn not been swept away by space whales, perhaps the TIE Defender could have changed the course of the war. Of course, it did cost 300,000 credits per unit, which is twice as much as an X-Wing and 6 times as much as a TIE Fighter. The elite version of the TIE Defender costs even more at 310,000 credits. Now, the First Order might look like a copy-paste of the Empire, but I think that's an oversimplification. The First Order is really just the Imperial Remnant, an organization that has learned from the mistakes of the Empire. Well, not completely, obviously, but when it comes to starfighter designs, they definitely learned a lot. They added shields and even some hyperdrives to their standard TIE fighters. This is also because the First Order had some manpower issues, and throwing away pilots in disposable starfighters seems like a terrible idea. The TIE Silencer represents everything the First Order learned about the old TIE line. You can see previous influences in its design. It has the S-foils of a TIE Interceptor, a similar space frame to a TIE Advance X1, and it also has the functionality of a TIE Defender. At 310,000 credits, the TIE Silencer was extremely expensive. It was also rolled out in limited numbers, and as per Imperial tradition, only ace pilots were allowed to test these prototype ships. Now we're going to travel back a few thousand years back to the Old Republic period. You know, when they still had a standing navy. The R-class starfighter was designed after the Great Sith War as a part of the Republic's Generation Tomorrow Starfighter initiative to replace the aging Star Saber XC-01 fighter. The ARC was sleek and delta-shaped. It featured foldable S-foils and was well equipped with weapon shields and a hyperdrive, despite its tiny size. Legends say that Quad Systems engineering was inspired by the ARC design when they built the Delta 7 Ether Sprite and A-Wing. As a matter of fact, the first designated A-Wing in Star Wars is the ARC-class tactical fighter. That's what it was called. But to put so much tech into such a small package costs quite a lot of money. You're basically dealing with the same problems that laptop designers have to deal with when they're making a very thin gaming laptop with like a dedicated memory card, which is also why if you ever go winter camping, guys, and you don't want to bring an open flame into your tent, just bring your laptop and play some video games. It will heat up the place immediately. It's estimated that a single Orc-class tactical strike fighter was worth more than 360,000 credits. What's even more impressive is that the Orc starfighter, which served from the beginning of the Mandalorian Wars to the end of the New Sith Wars and the Ruusan Reformation. This means that this starship served the Republic for 4,000 consecutive years. I mean, sure, they upgraded a little bit, but that is crazy. Like our previous ship, the Firespray 31 class patrol and attack craft was also quite rare. Only 6 of them were manufactured as well. The most famous of those would be Jango and Boba Fett's Slave 1. After the Slave 1 was stolen, the manufacturers and Quad Systems Engineering scraped the entire program. Now, what makes the Firespray 31 class patrol and attack craft so desirable is the legend that the Fetts built around it. All across the galaxy, Mandalorians and want-to-be bounty hunters would view the Firespray as the ultimate symbol of being a badass. Although in Legends, Quad Systems Engineering eventually would bring back the Firespray because of all of the demand. As of now, we don't have a price for the Firespray 31, but I'm sure high demand continues to drive up the price. So there you have it, guys. Those are some of the most expensive starfighters in the galaxy. Let me know in the comment section below which one you would choose to fly around the galaxy in. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.
Don't stay awake for too long. Don't go to bed.
The Venator-class Star Destroyer is one of my favorite capital ships in Star Wars, and that is because its design seems to be one that could actually work. Most Imperial ships of the line are designed for exchanging salvos of turbolaser fire, usually at pretty close line of sight ranges, which is stupid and costly and puts the crew of the ship in unnecessary danger, especially because there are better options and technology available. The Empire's navy was mostly untested until the end of the Galactic Civil War when the Rebel Alliance finally built up a fleet of their own that could challenge them. By then, though, it was far too late to change the Empire's capital ship doctrine, and so the Empire would suffer many losses because of their aged designs. The Republic's 1,000-meter-long Venator-class Star Destroyer served as an assault carrier. It could hold more than 400 starfighters on board and had a gigantic hangar door for quick deployment and retrieval. The Venator-class Star Destroyer had turbolasers, like an ISD, and other heavier weapons for close-range battles, but it was designed specifically to engage its enemies from afar with a large complement of fighters. This greatly extends the range of a Venator-class's striking abilities and also increases how many targets a Venator-class Star Destroyer can engage at one time. The Venator-class Star Destroyer costs around 59 million credits, but if you add the cost of its 400 plus starfighters on board, you're going to have an additional 60 million credits of expenditure. The Venator-class Star Destroyer might not be as impressive as an ISD upon first glance, but in the right hands, it could present a massive headache to its enemies. Next up, we have the 1,200-meter-long MC-75 Star Cruiser from Mon Calamari shipyards. These Star Cruisers were a bit smaller than the more popular MC-80s that everyone in Star Wars is more used to seeing. The M-75 started out life as a city ship. These were underwater buildings that served as civic centers during times of peace, and a warship if necessary when enemies came knocking on Mount Kala's door. And because these ships were designed to withstand the immense pressure of the deep ocean, they were actually very robust when it came to combat scenarios. The MC-75 was one of the first major capital ships utilized by the Alliance to restore the Republic. At the Battle of Scarif, Admiral Raddus would command the Profundity and lead the charge against a much greater Imperial force. The Profundity would outlast 2 Imperial-class Star Destroyers during the battle before getting taken down by a 3rd Imperial-class Star Destroyer. Aside from its very robust armor, the key to the Profundity's success was its redundant shield system, which had a lot less hit points than your usual shield system, but could recharge at a very fast rate because there were so many of these generators placed on board. And so the Profundity, like most MC-75s, afforded its crew a lot more protection than other ships in its class would. The MC-75 wasn't cheap though. Despite only being 100 meters longer than the Venator class, it cost more than 88 million credits. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer is one of the most iconic symbols of the Empire. And in many ways, its design really represents the major strengths and weaknesses of the Empire. This 1.6 kilometer, 1 mile long Star Destroyer was one of the most resource-intensive ships in the entire Imperial Navy. It also happened to be one of the most common capital ships in the Empire. And like the Empire, the ISD was all about bluster and appearing strong and terrifying. This thing had more than 60 turbolaser batteries on it and could take out an entire city in short order with all of that firepower. But the ISD also had some pretty big weaknesses, like the lack of point defense weapons, which were usually used to defend against smaller ships. And so the ISD required an ample amount of protection from picket vessels and escorts. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer was built to exchange broadsides with other comparable ships of its class. The Rebellion, however, was a quick mobile force and mostly made up of smaller ships and starfighters that could really exploit the ISD's blind spots. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer was more than just a ship of the line, though. During the early stages of the Galactic Civil War, the ship served as a mobile forward base of operations. One ISD could serve as the home and support system for an entire legion of the Empire's finest stormtroopers. Inside an Imperial-class Star Destroyer's massive hangar is basically everything you would need for a full-on operation. You have prefabricated bases, barracks, armor walkers, speeders, air support, transport vessels that get your troops down there, along with communication and logistical support. This is why an ISD costs a shocking 150 million credits per unit. Many Imperial historians have argued that this was an inefficient way to spend the military's budget, and instead of building so many ISDs, the Empire should have just focused on building a lot more smaller cruisers and frigates to kind of spread the presence of the Empire's military force across the galaxy at a much lower cost. The massive Subjugator-class heavy cruiser was one of the most formidable ships deployed during the Clone Wars period. Built for the Confederacy of Independent Systems, this battleship was almost 5,000 meters in length and featured a massive ion cannon which takes up a good portion of the ship. This mega ion cannon was able to take out entire fleets and disable them with one gigantic shot. This led to the mysterious disappearance of several Republic fleets, dealing a huge blow to the morale of the Republic Navy. The Subjugator class also had over 500 dual turbolasers on board and several other weapons emplacements. It could easily take on dozens of Venator-class Star Destroyers and still hold its own. The Subjugator class comes with a hefty price tag of 875 million credits, but considering its unique weapons and tools, I say it's probably well worth the price. Now, most Super Star Destroyers and Dreadnoughts and battle cruisers aren't going to have listed prices, simply because these are not usually ships that are mass-produced and instead are one-off creations, and therefore the costs can vary very greatly. Even the Executor class Super Star Destroyer class, which had several different iterations, doesn't list the price of each one of its vessels. Although in this case, this might also be in the Empire's interest to not let its citizens know how much money it's spending on these gigantic ships that keep crashing into one another. With the rise of the First Order, finding out prices became even more difficult, and that's because the First Order was mainly hidden in the Outer Rim and had to secretly contact companies to get around weapons bans in order to build their military force. For instance, the massive mega-class Star Dreadnought Supremacy was built by a subsidiary of Quat Drive Yards known as Quat and Tralla Engineering. This secret company was created by Sith cultists who had been hiding in the board of Quat Drive Yards. They were able to redirect funding for these technically illegal military contracts. The Mega-class Star Dreadnought, which is as long as the Executor-class Star Dreadnought, but 60 kilometers in width, is one of the largest starships ever built in the galaxy. It's even close in size to the first Death Star. This ship wasn't just a command vessel for the First Order, it served as a major home base for the entire movement. It's from here that Supreme Leader Snoke would command the forces of the First Order. No one really knows how much the ship costs, but realistically it must be in the tens, if not hundreds of billions of credits. For reference, the first Death Star, which was 160 kilometers in diameter, cost around 1 trillion galactic. Friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. As usual, my goal here on this channel is to make sure that your life in the Star Wars galaxy is as comfortable and devoid of hull breaches as possible, the leading cause of death for civilian pilots, aside from their ship getting eaten by hyperspace fauna, which is why you should buy Imperial Victory Bonds. Star Destroyers are the space whale's most natural enemy. Anyway, due to recent supply chain issues and the destruction of the first Death Star and the second Death Star and Starkiller Base, along with the destruction of Alderaan, Jeddah, and the entire Hosnian system, buying a ship isn't nearly as easy and as cheap as it used to be. Heck, back in my day, used to be able to get a Z95 well under the MSRP sticker price, and the dealer would still throw in like an extra deflector shield and some proton torpedoes to sweeten the deal. I actually fondly remember the government used to have a scheme called Credits for Junkers, which paid people to actually trade in their old rocket propulsion starships for the new, more clean, environmentally friendly ion engine-powered starships. So now most of us aren't thinking about buying our dream starship. We're being more careful and pragmatic with our economic choices. I mean, everyone still wants an A-Wing, I'm sure, but heck, those things are basically uncontrollable and expensive as hell to maintain. And what if you have a wife and a child? I mean, you can't just shove them in the astromech socket, can you? Can you? In economic times like this, it's all about finding a good economical starship that has good resale value. This way, when you decide to sell or upgrade your starfighter, you can minimize your loss. And so today we'll be showing you guys 5 starfighters that have excellent resale value. You guys know that I would never take a standard TIE into a dogfight. I hate the obtuse solar panel design that gives you massive blind spots, the lack of shields, hyperdrive. Heck, there's not even life support on this thing. But when it comes to resale value, it's not always about performance. Instead, you have to look at the market and what individuals are willing to buy. And the TIE LN actually has a lot of really good features that might attract your more budget buyers, and there's a lot of budget buyers. You see, TIE fighters are relatively cheap to begin with at around 60,000 credits, so they won't really break the bank when you purchase one. And while you could get one used, especially during the end of the Galactic Civil War at around 25,000 credits, if not less, there are some reasons why the TIE LN is an extremely smart buy from a resale point of view. First of all, the TIE LN was one of the most mass-produced starfighters in galactic history. I mean, much of the Clone Wars and all of the shenanigans that Palpatine pulled off, from nationalizing the banks to seizing resource-rich worlds to building up the military-industrial complex, was essentially to build this TIE fighter. While other starfighters focused more on performance and feature, the TIE fighter designers first focused on the manufacturing process and how to build things cheaply at scale. For instance, the TIE LN's ion engine is really an engineering marvel. It's one of the most precisely manufactured propulsion systems we've ever seen. It actually has no moving parts, and it has very, very low maintenance costs. It really does belong in a museum right next to the early 90s Honda Civic and those Honda dirt bikes that got me and our video editor Congo through Peru. We high-sided, we low-sided, we drove through sand and snow, and our bodies failed way more times than our bike ever did. The point is, the TIE LN was extremely reliable and well built. Sure, it was fragile even when compared to an A-Wing, but good luck maintaining that thing without an entire military infrastructure. On the other hand, you could still keep a TIE fighter running even decades after the Empire collapsed and they stopped manufacturing parts for them. And by the time the New Republic arose, so did a new market for old TIE fighters. You see, you had the centrist faction in the government. They basically supported stronger federal control over the galaxy, and they had a really unhealthy nostalgia for Imperial memorabilia. So a full-on TIE fighter would fetch you top dollar. So remember guys, resale is all about demand, guys. I mean, someone just bought this 2000 Acura Integra for $112,000 recently, which is ridiculous because this car originally cost around $30,000. I mean, sure, it's mint condition and it has less than 7,000 miles, but I guess people really like VTEC, huh? Wow.
Ting tong, ping, 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 pong. Ting tong, ting tong.
Next up is the Delta 7 Ether Sprite. It's the spiritual successor of the Old Republic R-Class Tactical Strike Fighter and the progenitor of Quat's modern line of interceptors, which saw action from the Clone Wars to the Galactic Civil War. Like the TIE LN, what attracts people towards the Delta 7 is its engineering uniqueness. But whereas the TIE Fighter focused on economy, smart design, and reliability, the Delta 7 is as pure of a starfighter as there can be, in the sense that maximum attention was placed on flight characteristics and control feel. If an X-Wing is like one of those self-steering Beamer leader adventure bikes with the electronically adjusting suspension systems, then the Delta 7 is an old Japanese leader bike with no traction control, no ABS, no throttle or engine modes for beginners, and a swing arm that likes to induce wobbles at life-threatening speeds. Why would you even ride the second bike when you can ride the first one, which, to be honest, is a lot of fun? But no one can really afford one of these things. We choose to ride that second bike because it's challenging. You feel the engine vibrating, you feel the contact of the tires gripping on as you drop your knee like Rossi, you feel the terror of the back wheel locking up because you stepped on the brake a bit too hard, or the front wheel lift because you popped the clutch a little too late. This is what the Delta 7 Ether Sprite represented. You're always towing the line with this thing between having fun and dying. When it was introduced decades before the Clone Wars even started, it was one of the most sophisticated airframes ever designed, and its weight-to-power ratio was ridiculous. And that's because most internal systems that other starships possessed, like flight aid sensors and even inertial dampeners, were removed from this ship. And the controls were so sensitive that you could basically knock yourself out by pulling too many G's in a really tight turn. And that's because the Delta 7 Ether Sprite was built specifically with the Jedi Order in mind. Jedi pilots use the Force to sense their way through the battlefield. They also use the Force to detect enemy pilots and keep the blood flowing to their brains while they performed crazy maneuvers. And so this was a ship for adrenaline junkies and also people who worship the Jedi Order or are really into Jedi Order history. And because the ship was produced in such small numbers, you're talking about an astronomical resale value here. Even during its production cycle, a Delta 7 cost $180,000 new and $145,000 used. Wait a few years into the Galactic Civil War period, I'm pretty sure you could sell one of these babies for at least $250,000 credits. Kind of like this 1992 Honda NR750, which had that crazy screaming V4 engine. It sold for 4 times its original price. Y'all knew that the T-65B X-Wing would be on this list. It's too heroic not to be. I mean, it took out the first Death Star and the second Death Star. Just like how the Ford GT40 took out the Italians at Le Mans in '66. Yes, the X-Wing is an excellent starfighter. It has an amazing pedigree. It basically carried the rebellion on its shoulders in those first few years of the war. But what really drives the astronomical price you can fetch for an original T-65B is the fact that it's a winner. It represents everything amazing and incredible about the rebellion's truly underdog fight that it carried out against the Empire. I mean, Incom didn't even have to advertise this starfighter to anyone. This starfighter was one of the most recognizable and desirable starships in the galaxy. It was everywhere from billboard ads to coffee cups to t-shirts. Every child also had a small replica at home as well. And I'm pretty sure on some backward planets in the Outer Rim, the word X-Wing basically just means starfighters to the locals. And while initially during the Galactic Civil War period, you could pick up a used X-Wing for 65,000 credits, which is a pretty big drop compared to its new price, which is around 150,000 credits. This is mostly due to the fact that X-Wings were hastily assembled in smaller mobile starfighter factories. Because, you know, if the Rebellion actually had a large Starship factory, it would definitely get blown up into bits within weeks. So you did have real quality and maintenance issues on a lot of the earlier X-Wings that were essentially made in small, tiny garages. But once the T-65B was getting phased out for the T-70 and the T-85 during the New Republic era, they became increasingly popular amongst collectors. To this day, it's basically everyone's dream to have an X-Wing. The 1967 Ferrari 330P4 is a gorgeous looking car. After Ford's famous 1-2-3 finish in Le Mans in '66, the Italians managed to win back their pride by placing 1-2-3 a year later at the 24 Hours of Daytona. That was with the '67 Ferrari 330P4. The history behind this vehicle is incredible, but also only 4 of these beauties were ever made, and only one is left in decent shape today. And so exclusivity is a huge part of why some ships are going to have massive resale value. This is why the Firespray 31 class patrol and attack craft is on our list. This vessel was famously flown by Jango Fett, the feared bounty hunter and warrior who popularized the image of this little-known experimental craft. The bounty hunter actually stole this ship from the prison world of OVO 4. There were originally 6 prototype ships, but all of them except for Jango Fett's Slave 1 were destroyed during his heist. In Legends, the demand for these ships were so high that Quad Systems Engineering actually brought the design back into production for a limited time. These, of course, were all swallowed up by Mandalorian Protector fanboys. I'm pretty sure they waited outside the Quad Systems Engineering factory for that midnight launch. This is all because Jango Fett and his son Boba Fett made these ships quite desirable amongst Mandalorians. Our last tip for finding starfighters with good resale value is actually finding a vessel that is extremely expensive but also deserves to be expensive, as in it's very reliable and has high quality parts and design. I mean, I love riding Ducatis, but they can be seriously janky if not properly taken care of, and they require a lot of attention and expensive replacement parts. And for some reason, the motor oil in a Ducati always seems to get dirtier quicker with particulates. And so, when we're looking at expensive Star Wars starfighters that deserve their crazy price tags, I would look no further than the TIE Silencer, the private vessel of Kylo the Emo Ren. This thing has a price tag of 310,000 credits. It was created during the First Order period, which built on Imperial starfighter designs but focused more on quality rather than quantity. The Starship had deflector shields, 4 laser cannons, 2 heavy laser cannons, and 2 missile launchers that could fire a wide array of munitions. It also had an advanced stealth field generator and a top-notch hyperdrive. The cockpit featured an armored tub, something we see here in the real world only in ground attack craft, like the venerable A-10. So there you have it, guys. Those are 5 vessels that you should buy if really you're thinking economics when you're purchasing a starfighter, because when you sell these things, you'll most likely get a huge chunk of your initial money back.
Don't stay awake for too long, don't go to bed.
Hi there. I didn't see you guys coming, but now that you're here, let's talk. Did you know since the destruction of Alderaan, thousands of children have been orphaned? Like this bird bath, their dreams, hopes, and parents are now dead.
We here at the Alderanian Reclamation Program have been working hard to recover what we can from the ruins. Now, for just a small donation of 20 credits, you can provide an Alderanian orphan with a spirit box, inside which is a generous portion of space dust from the remains of the planet. Now, it might not tell them bedtime stories or pay for their education, but it'll make them feel like they're holding their parents once again. Alderanian Reclamation Program is legally obligated to inform you that there's a 99.99998 chance that information inside the box will not match the inside of me. The Alderanian Reclamation Program is not a registered non-profit charity organization. Donations are not tax deductible. Check with your local authorities before donating to the Alderanian Reclamation Program, as they are considered pirates in certain systems. The Alderanian Reclamation Program is a subsidiary of the Black Suns LLC.
With advertisers blockading YouTube like the Trade Federation was blockading Naboo, we're depending on great sponsors like the Black Suns and of course our Patreon supporters to help continue running the show. So if you have a moment, please check out our Patreon if you can help out. Anyway, last episode, using science, math, magic, the Force, and the power of love, we were able to figure out that one galactic credit is worth around 1 to 1.5 US dollars. Today, we're going to apply that knowledge to the Rebel Alliance's motley crew of starfighters and see if we can actually afford any of them. So let's do this alphabetically and start with the A-Wing Interceptor. This sleek beauty was a product of Quad Systems Engineering. It was essentially a pilot strapped onto two powerful sublight engines. The A-Wing, like its predecessor, the ETA-2 Actus Interceptor, had an incredible top speed along with an extremely sensitive set of controls. It was said that only a Force user could take full advantage of this speedy little ship's capabilities. Unlike its Imperial counterpart, the A-Wing had shields and a hyperdrive, which made it relatively expensive at $175,000 to $262,500 US dollars. That's in the price range of a 2016 Aston Martin DB9. But actually, compared to modern fighters, it's ridiculously cheap. The F-35 costs around $100 million per unit and $32,000 per flight hour. So in just around half a dozen missions, the F-35's operation costs alone will be more than the A-Wing itself. Why is that? Well, it could be that Star Wars technology is so much more advanced than ours that it cuts down costs dramatically in R&D, manufacturing, and labor. But also, companies in Star Wars produced a lot more vehicles than our Earth counterparts. The US military has the largest air force in the world and fields just over 2,000 fighter jets. In comparison, each one of the 25,000 Imperial Star Destroyers in the Emperor's fleet carries 72 starfighters. That means just on ISDs alone, there are 1.8 million starfighters. That's a number closer to the 1 million Corolla Toyotas manufactured last year. The thing is, the more you sell, the more your price per unit goes down. One-time initial costs like R&D are recuperated as you move more inventory. Also, you can purchase more raw materials in bulk, saving production costs along with investing in a more efficient manufacturing setup. Now, I'm not saying that an F-35 would ever be cheaper than a Corolla, but what I'm saying is that if you produced millions of them, you could probably lower your cost per unit dramatically. Next up is the B-Wing, or Blade Wing. It was relatively slow and awkward to fly because of its unique gyroscope cockpit attachment, but it more than made up for it in firepower. It was primarily used as an assault ship and was extremely useful at taking out capital ships. A single B-Wing costs around $220,000 to $330,000. Next up is the famous Incom X-Wing. We'll be talking about the iconic T-65B model. It was good for all sorts of missions from interception and escort to bombing and ground support. The perfect starfighter for a fleet lacking large capital ships. But being a jack of all trades meant it didn't necessarily excel at anything. Now, if you took out a few keywords from our last paragraph like starfighter, you'd think I was talking about the controversial F-35 program. But unlike the F-35 program, the X-Wing cost a reasonable $150,000 to $225,000. The F-35, as we stated before, costs around $100 million per unit, but as more units are made, that number is estimated to continue going down and reach $85 million per unit by 2019. But that could still buy you like 400 X-Wings, which is crazy, right? So why is this happening? Well, in Legends, Incom was in the middle of being nationalized by the Empire, and several senior designers and engineers decided to leave the company, and they secretly gave schematics of a new prototype starfighter to the Rebel Alliance. That, of course, would turn out to be the X-Wing. Essentially, the Rebels paid 0 credits for any R&D. The F-35 program, which is estimated to cost around $1.5 trillion in its lifetime, is heavily weighed down by initial R&D costs.
Before there was even an F-35, the DoD funded a Joint Strike Fighter contest. This included the forgotten Boeing X-32. This concept demonstration phase alone cost $2 billion. The X-Wing was made out of desperation and necessity, much like the warbirds of World War II. The Spitfire Mk1, which held the line at the Battle of Britain, cost only 12,000 pounds, or just under $1 million in today's money. If you know your ABCs, then following an X-Wing is usually a Y-Wing closing in for the kill. Many of the Rebels' Y-Wings were actually stolen from Imperial scrapyards. The version that the Rebels ran with had much of its exterior paneling and components, including the turret gun, removed. This gave the Y-Wing better performance, cooling, and also allowed mechanics easier access to repair its components. The Y-Wings we see in the original trilogy were mostly manufactured and purchased during the Republic era. That was before the economic turmoil caused by the Clone Wars and the rise of the Empire, which affected the value of the galactic credit. Therefore, its cost is probably closer to the higher end of our estimate of $140,000 to $210,000 per unit. But of course, because most of these ships were stolen, that means the only thing you really have to worry about is maintenance and operation costs. Which comes to my next point for all of you wannabe starfighter pilots. Before you purchase your dream starfighter, keep in mind how much it's actually going to cost for you to operate one of these vehicles. It's not cheap, and if you live in a large city, you're going to have to pay docking fees, and be sure to check with your local government about emissions laws and piloting regulations. There's a chance that in your region it might not even be legal to own a starfighter. Now, unless you're a savant, you're also going to need an astromech to store hyperspace routes. An R2 unit costs around $4 to $6 grand, and these are the droids you're looking for. The last thing you're going to want to do is jump accidentally through a black hole, unless you're Matthew McConaughey. And if you are Matthew McConaughey, are you willing to accept the consequences of seeing everyone around you grow old without you? The point is, like everything in life, there are hidden costs, which brings us to today's investing tip. Playing the interstellar stock exchange like it's a game sabacc is the quickest way to find yourself half naked chained to a hut. For all you high frequency traders out there, don't forget, every time you cash out, you're paying that broker's fee, and it's cutting into your gains. As the famous Mune investor Higo Damas once said, only a fool focuses on the short game. A master is much more farsighted.
Don't stay awake for too long. Don't go to bed.
There are few more prestigious postings in the Empire than the Imperial Star Destroyer.
Hello there.
Whether you were inspiring to be a commander or a quartermaster, you had to be at the top of your respective game to serve aboard one of these wedge-shaped death machines. Inside each one of these destroyers was every imaginable tool an Imperial commander could want. Just the appearance of one of these ships could end the battle and send the Empire's enemies running in fear. Now, we figured out that one galactic credit is worth about $1 to $1.5 US in one of our last episodes. Now, we'll be using that figure to determine how much it costs to outfit a Star Destroyer and all the vehicles within it. As we found out when looking at the prices of Rebel Alliance starfighters, ships in Star Wars are much cheaper than you think. And the Imperial class Star Destroyer continues that trend. Produced at Quat Drive Yard, it cost only 150 million credits, or around 150 to 225 million US. It's around the same price as a new Boeing 787 Dreamliner. This is for a ship that is 1,600 meters long and has a crew of over 37,000 people. That's a terrific deal. In comparison, the largest aircraft carrier in the world, the Nimitz class at 330 meters, costs $4.5 billion. In our biggest vessel in space, the International Space Station is estimated to have cost $150 billion since its launch. So what's with the massive price difference? Last episode we discussed how starships are manufactured at a much higher rate in the Star Wars galaxy than compared to jet fighters here on Earth. That also means that mass-produced items usually have a lower price per unit. This applies to this situation too. There's only one ISS and just 10 Nimitz-class carriers on Earth, but 25,000 Star Destroyers. Placed end to end, these Star Destroyers could wrap around Earth more than 3 times. But there's another reason why the Empire's ships are so cheap, and that all has to do with Palpatine. After the fall of the Republic, the Emperor made sure to seize control of several strategically important systems, like Corellia, Quat, Fondor, and Ringo Vinda. These worlds were home to the largest shipyards in the galaxy, and were more or less nationalized, and began to supply the Empire's rapid militarization. Several weapons and vehicle manufacturers also suffered the same fate. Now, when you hear nationalization and government intervention, you're thinking, oh, well, they're just going to mess everything up and increase costs and lower efficiency. But it wasn't just crazy left and right-wing dictators that nationalized things. The United States seized control of several key industries during World War II to make sure they were focused on the war efforts. Now, there are a few major costs associated with the production of any item, the first one being material costs. During the creation of the Death Star, the Empire nationalized thousands of mining companies for resources, and when there wasn't enough raw material, they started looking at legacy planets. Legacy planets were the Star Wars galaxy's equivalent of national parks and wildlife preserves. These were beautiful, pristine worlds with diverse ecosystems and natural beauty that were protected from industrial development. The Empire secretly used mercenaries and smugglers to plant weapons and insurgency groups on many of these worlds, which of course allowed the Empire to intervene and occupy these planets, removing their legacy status. And oddly enough, all these worlds had extremely valuable minerals that were quickly mined by the Empire. And the Empire, being the generous people that they are, probably supplied these raw materials to their state-owned companies at cost. The second major cost in production is labor. After the rise of the Empire, one of the first things to go was the Republic's anti-slavery laws. As a matter of fact, in Legends, one imperial decree stated that slavery was a proper punishment for citizens who committed civil disorder, aka people who spoke out against their rule. After fighting an extremely bitter war on Kashyyyk, Wookiees were labeled as non-sentient beings, and they, along with many other species, were conscripted into slave work brigades to construct the Empire's weapons. There were also hive-like species like the Geonosians who were really cheap to employ. And if all that failed, you had robots, which were relatively cheap after the initial purchasing price and, more importantly, union-free. So that's why an Imperial-class Star Destroyer is so cheap, and the Empire was able to create a navy many times larger than the Republic's. Now let's take a look at what's inside of a Star Destroyer. Usually on board is a contingent of 72 in-space superiority TIE fighters. These were the Japanese Zeros of the Star Wars galaxy, fast and dangerous but cheap and made out of cardboard. At $60,000 to $90,000, they were amongst the cheapest fighters you could buy. Now, I know a lot of you guys are thinking, I want to buy a TIE fighter. Right now, it's relatively cheap and it's reasonable. I could probably put a down payment on it and lease it. But if you really think about it, a TIE fighter actually has a lot of hidden costs, especially for an independent operator. First, the life support system is quite minimal, so you'll need a flight suit. Preferably a really good flight suit that is vacuum sealed and armored, because the TIE fighter actually has no shields. So should you get hit in a dogfight, your best chance at survival is actually hitting that ejection button and launching yourself into space. So you'll definitely need a spacesuit. On top of that, you'll need to arrange for transport to bring you from system to system because the TIE fighter lacks a hyperdrive. You're almost better off buying a used TIE Defender for around $80,000 to $120,000. They had everything the generic TIE fighter lacked and generally could outperform any starfighter in the Rebel Alliance. I know, you should never buy a secondhand starfighter, but have you guys heard of Sonar's certified pre-owned TIE fighter program? They hand-select battle-damaged TIE fighters and refurbish them for resale. On top of that, you get a 5 years manufacturer warranty, which is terrific, considering the average lifespan of a TIE fighter pilot is only like 10 missions. Sonar certified pre-owned TIE fighters. They'll scrub the cockpit so clean that you won't smell the fecal matter and blood from the last pilot who died inside that death box. But I guess if you're not into saving money, you could splurge on a brand new one at around $300,000 to $450,000. But at that price point, guys, you're better off buying a one-bedroom apartment in the middle of Coruscant. Real estate is an investment. A new shiny fighter isn't. They depreciate the second they leave the dealership. Now, along with the TIE fighters, there were usually around 8 Lambda-class shuttles on an Imperial Star Destroyer. These sturdy transports were built with plenty of protection and offensive weapons. They were used to ferry around VIPs and small squads for special operations. At around $240,000 to $360,000, they're about the same price as the Cessna 172. Which isn't anywhere near as cool as an Imperial shuttle. The sight of one commanded respect and made people wonder what high-ranking Imperial officer was aboard. No one ever cuts off a Lambda shuttle in the space lanes. The 25,000 ISDs in the Imperial fleet cost $3,906 trillion to $5,859 trillion to build. Our planet is estimated to only have $60 trillion in total. Well, that puts everything into perspective. The Empire was huge.